What's going on, everybody? It's FREEDO here for Your Overwatch. Jeff Goodman popped onto the forums to talk about some balance stuff. So we're going to cover and respond to things that he mentioned, but as well, this is going to be my entire PTR assessment of what's going on with the balance and the meta when we take in total all of the massive changes that they put through. Something like 2/3 of the heroes got buffs and nerfs. How is that going to make the chips fall? Now, first of all, the premise of Jeff Goodman responding to this forum was that a poster was giving him credit for fighting the good fight. Balancing Overwatch is essentially impossible, and despite all that, Jeff and the team do a really good job. I agree, but as we're going to get into later in the video, there's some certain hurdles that are almost insurmountable in some ways. But in this first post, he reminisces about a lot of the old stuff that was really overpowered. McCree's Fan the Hammer used to do as much as all of his bullets, so 70 damage per shot, if you thought 55 was insane. Poor Zenyatta used to have 150 health. Far's Conch Blast used to deal 700 damage to barriers and shields, poor Zenyatta, and Reinhardt's Charge had no wind-up back in the day. You just instantly went forward and killed the thing in front of you. This next post, he's responding to someone asking, what do you think the most overpowered balance change the team has made? And his first response is Brigitte, who her initial balance was pretty off the mark, and even with multiple nerfs, she is still very strong, implying that the nerfs they put through haven't even really slowed the character down. He goes on to say that the Hanzo rework to speed up his projectile is something he kind of regrets, because although it has made him a lot more consistent, he lost some of what made him feel different from other heroes. So I tend to agree with that. Now we have a bunch of medium range damage dealers that are kind of interchangeable, plus or minus a couple abilities. And he closes by saying, in retrospect, I wonder if there were another way we could have got to the same goal. Now I'm going to respond to him talking about Brigitte and more, but we have a couple more posts to set the foundation of what we're talking about here. When asked on what future buffs we might see, he said possibly Junkrat buffs and some different Reaper buffs, since the pure passive healing buff was really problematic at lower ranks. He goes on to explain the Junkrat situation in further depth, saying this: we would have liked to keep the Junkrat buff at 140 for a pure DPS standpoint, especially against tanks and barriers, but it was just really punishing once it could one-shot 200 health heroes with a 50% boost. We experimented with making the grenades no longer explode on enemy impact once they hit a surface, as a way to nerf his spam without affecting direct hits, but it felt really weird and kind of broken in a lot of cases. Now, as you guys know, I got a lot of opinions about this Junkrat change, and in fact, oddly enough, without Junkrat being OP, I think the meta isn't going to be going the way a lot of us want to. I'll get into that and more right after this last post. This one, he's talking about Mercy, where a user is saying, I like the new Mercy, however, could we please maybe get a halfway point with her healing? Perhaps not 60 a second, but maybe 55. Jeff Goodman responds by saying, I think that's certainly possible. Overall, her healing output is still higher than other healers, which she pays for by not being able to split focus and do other things while healing. I'd also love to be able to increase the power of her damage boosting, but it causes a lot of issues with various breakpoints where suddenly X hero can one-shot 200 health heroes, etc. There are other ways to make it feel better without just adding raw damage though. We'll see. As you guys know, I think making Mercy viable again is absolutely crucial to be competitive with the GOATS meta. I believe that almost no matter how you buff Mercy or rework her, she will not get played in a brawling deathball comp. Other people disagree with me on that. And if you want to see damage heroes back into the metagame, in my opinion, Mercy's the key. And with Jeff Goodman saying that there might be other things they can do with damage boost, it got me thinking what they might do. Well, a lot of players are saying that they would like to see Mercy have a bit more of a skill aspect to it. Well, what if your damage boost ability instead was something you shot at a teammate in order to give them a timed effect of damage amplification? And then you could go back to healing at the same time, allowing you to do simultaneous things just like Zen does. Or even if it was a thing that auto-locked on, but targeted and had a duration, this would add to like the management of the character at least, especially hearing from a lot of Mercy players' opinions. I think beam juggling was a thing that they enjoyed having to do, whereas now Mercy's so weak that she has to just stay way, way back, pocketing one target and isn't able to mix it up in the fight very often, and overall is just pretty weak in comparison to the devastating rushdown triple support comp that exists. So that's pretty cool, but let's go back and unpack some of this other stuff Jeff said. possibly Junkrat and Reaper going to be getting further buffs. Why would that be the case? Here's a secret, guys. I don't think Goats comp is going away. A lot of people are saying Goats is dead. I don't think so. And I don't think Jeff Goodman thinks so either, noting that they're still going to be leaving some further ramp-ups on Junkrat and Reaper on the table in case that rears its ugly head, and I think it will. And I think we've got clued in to the direction they're looking to go with these types of heroes. Although they didn't end up keeping the nerf to Junkrat spam, they're obviously trying to limit low-skill aspects of these heroes while still making them effective up against the high-tier Goats comp. The major problem and the elephant in the room here is that triple support as a concept is just too strong. So much so that we think it's not going to be selectable in Overwatch's future. There's some nerfs that would have made serious dents in Goats comp that they didn't make. And overall, after testing all of the changes a ton and trying to run the math on how some of the others work, I think they're going to have to look to some of these ideas if we actually want to see Goats comp go away with just balancing alone and no other arbitrary restrictions onto the format to make it unpickable. I'll get into the PTR patch in a moment, but first let me list off some of the nerfs I would like to see to Goats if we actually wanted it to go. Some might be too heavy-handed and cause problems in other areas, but here's how I see it. Brigitte has too much health on her shield, plain and simple. She has a combined 750 health, and it all self-regens. The size of Brigitte's shield is incredibly small, meaning that focusing it is actually difficult, and the amount of shielding you get for the density of screen space it takes up is incredibly high. And because Brig can heal herself and then push up in Brawl to go offensive while her shield is self-regenning, a lot of times she can be a substitute main tank. A mini main tank is what I used to call her, which helps Winston Goats be better than it probably should, which makes it so Goats comp can clutch back fights even when you do kill the main tank. So because of that, I think Brig's shield should be 250 health, because if Brig is supposed to be a support, she shouldn't be able to do so much heavy lifting as a tank as well. If she had less shielding, she'd feel like she had to play with her tank rather than replace it when it dies. They also could look to make armor pack a bit more of a healing over time, like Ana's heal dart is. It being instant is just way too good, and although she numerically puts out less healing than other healers, burst healing is the best, and she's the best burst healer and has a mini nano boost on cooldown, so not only is she this tank that stalls the point and does chip healing really well with Inspire, she also has one of the better healing abilities in the game, which is auto lock-on. You can't even disrupt it with a Winston bubble like you could with Ana's healing, for example. And to that point, if armor pack was a projectile and you could block it and eat it with Winston and Diva, well, we're looking at an entirely different game here. But until that type of change goes through, what else is kind of a problem? Well, meleeing through barriers is something that I've talked about at great length. I think this is a massive one. If when a melee hit a barrier, it didn't penetrate it, this all of a sudden would mean that when you're playing Reinhardt and you're discorded at half health running for your life, you didn't instantly die due to the melee penetration of the enemy Rein and Brig Wing towards you. It'll allow you to play defensively, and shielding would matter. The problem is, the Goats comp has all the shielding in the world that blocks all sorts of hit scan and projectile damage, but when you try to put up your tank as sort of the sacrificial lamb on the altar, has a 2,000 health point shield, they can just ignore it largely and penetrate past it to outright bully him. And because of this principle, teams have to run a full Goats comp in combination with their own Reinhardt just to keep him alive up against their Goats comp. If you run damage in a 2-2-2 with Zarya Rein, you simply get run over immediately as soon as the enemy Zarya bubble is on cooldown. Because the problem is, if you have damage characters and they have Goats, your damage shoots shields, defense matrix, and bubbles, ignores you, and runs over your tank. And your tank can't survive because their damage goes through barriers and yours doesn't. This is why in Overwatch League we've seen teams overcommit to play like all damage, right? Like 4 damage, 1 wrecking ball, 1 mercy, because the only way you have a chance to do any damage against all these shields is if you have a surround on them and they can't block every angle and your tank can run away. And even then, that comp's not very good. Turns out one hero swap here or there in the Goats comp makes it totally fine up against this, whether that means a Tracer, a Widow, an Ana instead of Zen, what have you, depending on the map. Goats is way more stable than this overcommitment comp. Not to mention, you don't have the OP support ults in it that just run over team fights for free anyway. Also, this shield change would buff Orisa and Winston, who both need to shield dance in order to block damage normally, but doesn't matter up against melee hits. They have to run for their lives away from Rein and Brigitte, who are insane damage dealers. You might think this is an over nerf to the comp, but I don't think it is, because why does it get to block all the other types of damage in the game, but not melee? It would just mean you would have to win the shield break war like any other comp, and then all of a sudden damage matters again because shield break matters. But right now it doesn't, and it still doesn't even going on to the next patch. So I want to spend the rest of the video dissecting some of the PTR buffs and nerfs that came through, and why I ultimately think it's not even enough to do too much damage to the GOATS comp overall. Unfortunately, I'm really sad to say, because I'd love to see it go. But first and foremost, without Junkrat being OP, there really isn't a character in the game that punishes you from playing hand in hand together. And although doing tank star damage is nice, because it doesn't hit any crazy breakpoints, it's not going to be too much different, and it might be the case that having Rip Tire's charge rate decreased by 10%, you may have preferred the previous damage values, which is a scary thing to behold. But FREEDO, what about the nerfs to speed boost, Zarya, and Zenyatta? Surely, those are some of the most important characters in GOATS comp, but do those nerfs have an impact? The new Zarya will have a tighter splash on her ult fire, only 2 meters, whereas on high charge it used to go up to 3. That's going to matter in terms of accuracy of hitting shots, but also dealing less damage overall because the splash would have hit multiple things before. This might matter if GOATS comp feared dive at all. Against dive, that ult fire change looks kind of bad, but up against static comps or in GOATS mirrors, it's not going to make a difference because both teams have a Zarya, or your enemy's so stationary that you're going to bombard them anyway. But luckily, up against bunker at least, maybe you charge grav a bit slower. And overall, the conclusion I come to here is that there might be an opening for bunker to have a chance up against GOATS, but more than likely, I think GOATS will still overpower it. Now, on to the next one, speed boost. I think it's really easy for us to dream up a scenario where GOATS comp moves slower, so that means we can shoot it and kill it, right? I don't think that's what's gonna happen, because realistically, the strength of top-level GOATS teams and players right now is pathing. Pathing to avoid damage, get all of your tanking to block off all of the lines of sight of potential cooldowns that could come wreck you, then get onto the objective, then you win. GOATS comp doesn't really need to speed after it gets on the objective. By then, it's going to have Zarya at full charge, you're running into a Brigitte and a Reinhardt hammer. Really, nothing's been nerfed about the GOATS comp once it gets onto the point. The only dream we might have is that with a speed boost reduction, you can kill it before it gets onto the point. But realistically, good GOATS teams use cover, they get creative with the directions they take on the map in order to avoid damage. I think this creates a small window of extra time where you can shoot the GOATS comp while it's moving, and perhaps on some maps you're going to struggle to clear long distances. So finally there might be a couple maps where GOATS doesn't feel very playable, but overall I actually doubt it, because realistically the thing that made GOATS unbeatable was the overload of damage denial. Simply just having an extra barrier out of your DPS slot, who also is basically a tank in Brigitte, along with having all of the best damage denial in the game between Rein Barrier, Defense Matrix, and Bubbles. On top of that, then having the best support ults in the game with Transcendence and Sound Barrier that got buffed for seemingly no reason. It's all of those things together that make it impenetrable. Yes, it moving a bit slower at times is going to open some gaps where hopefully you can get a pick off, but I don't think it's enough to reliably say we're not going to run GOATS. I think it just makes GOATS a bit harder to run. All right, up next, the Zenyatta Discord nerf. Is this really a nerf? They took it down by 5%. And I was interested in trying to actually stress this number to see if I could find interactions where I thought this mattered. What does GOATS do with Zenyatta? Well, puts Discord on your main tank, no matter what it is, or any target really, but usually the main tank, and even if you have a barrier up, if you don't cleanse that Discord, Rein and Brigitte can swing past barriers to kill you. Rein does 75 and 100 with his hammer and fire strike. Brig does 30 per swing. Once all of that hits you, that's 200 damage over the course of like a second that they can just keep applying to you. Sure, will the 5% damage nerf make these types of interactions do less? It's about 10 damage, because remember too, Diva and Zarya are also chipping in. So once you're doing like 500 damage to a Reinhardt to try to kill him, well, old and new Discord, this is going to be a difference of like 25 damage. So over the course of the game, these little bits of damage are going to add up to hundreds and maybe a couple thousand of team damage that is going to be lower. But unless this damage value changes any breakpoints of the entire team focusing you with damage that a lot of it you can't even block, I don't see Goats losing its lethality and being able to bully any frontline you put up against it swinging onto you. You see, when you start to add these things up, I think you should be pretty pessimistic about the likelihood of Goats not being the top tier meta comp come next patch. Because even the things they buffed, oddly enough, I think it nerfs dive more than death ball. For example, Orisa being able to move faster while shooting looks really good when she's shield dancing up against a Genji or a Winston, because she's able to kite back faster while still doing damage. That's a big deal. But up against death ball, I don't think it matters at all, because once the death ball's on you doing this focus fire damage, Goats is swinging on you, you're just gonna die anyway. And dodging doesn't matter because they're doing melee hits, right? It's not like you could go into your barrier and be safe against Zarya a bit, but for the most part, you're getting swung on through your barrier anyway, and you're dead. So moving faster as Orisa doesn't really help you against Deathball too much. The Hammond change as well. It's a quality of life fix. It'll make him more fluid and not be as susceptible to have to get stunned coming out of roll to pop his adaptive shield. But even then, I think any Wrecking Ball play in the Overwatch League is basically just got laughed at. It's very easy to outplay, especially when you consider if you're really struggling against it, well, you can just take Zen off and put on an Ana, who's also then got a sleep dart as well. Then you have stun, sleep dart, and speed boost, all that can outplay the Wrecking Ball. He's not very viable, and this is the problem with Goats comp. We're also adding in Baptiste, who I think in general isn't very good in Goats, but is going to be used in some Goats mirrors, and likely on a few key maps and interactions like this. The strongest Goats characters are Lucio, Zen, and Brigitte, but the scary thing about Goats is that because there's so much flexibility in the roster, there are some cases where you're probably going to put Baptiste in there to deal with a specific interaction, just like you do with Ana up against Wrecking Ball and Sombra. So I hate to come out here and give you guys bad news, but Goats ain't going away. At least that's what I think. One major change is that Winston now does way more damage to armored targets, which means he'll farm up Primal Rage at the poke stage a lot faster. But at the same time, the crowd control buffs that came through, I think, hurt Winston more than other characters, because it used to be, as you start to jump in, if you get crowd controlled, you kept some of that momentum. But now, because boops are always reliable, no matter what action you're taking, whether you're moving into it, against it, whatever, that doesn't matter. Winston straight up gets denied and deflected on his dives, meaning Lucio and Brig up against Winston are even stronger now. And on top of that, they're stronger against Orisa too, who just goes flying when she's shooting. So these other main tanks, Winston and Orisa, although they've got some buffs and improvements, are going to be more easily manipulated. So long story short, there's a couple key problems here with the buffs and nerfs Blizzard are trying to put into effect in order to deal with Goats comp, is that it feels much similar to how they were trying to buff and nerf characters into or out of the dive meta. Back then, the cornerstone of dive was that Tracer was an unstoppable force. She could take half the map by herself and come in largely uncontested if you had the skills to do it. I think back then that was a much more fair world because only the top players in the world were capable of even playing this style. Whereas now we're in a world where it's all revolved around getting Brigitte onto the point and charging up Zarya. Surviving, getting the most OP ults in the game, denying your ability to stall the point or kill them. They win the objective for free. GG, you have to mirror Goats most of the time. The only saving grace I really can put up to have a dream to think that it's going to make an impact against Goats is Baptiste, because there's a principle of immortality field that I think you're going to want to think about. If both teams can be immortal at any point, what team comp benefits more from that? A comp that has brawling characters and tanks, or a comp that has ranged damage? I'd argue that it's the glass cannons that you want to keep alive with immortality field like Far Barrage, Bastion, McCree, Symmetra at high charge, these characters that otherwise would die to focus fire, now you can save with Immortality Field. And that doesn't really apply for the GOATS comp, except for Zarya, who is the character that if you just keep saving her from death, she's going to get stronger and stronger, then give you one of the best ults in the game. So the only route really away from GOATS being meta is that if teams can set up for Immortality Field to keep their big damage dealers alive to punish the range disadvantage that GOATS has, then we might reliably have a way to deal with the 3-3. But even then, I'm not so sure that 3-3 just can't make one hero swap in order to deal with whatever comp synergizes with Baptiste to do this. Because after all, we're still playing a single objective game all the time. Yes, there's a lot of different maps and a lot of different game modes. Supposedly, they really are just single objective, all of them. They're basically all the same map type. And because of that, as long as you can get this comp onto the point, it's going to destroy things, no matter if you can kill it or not. The bigger problem we've come to with Overwatch is that the power creep to play the objective and having teamwork has gone too far. So much so, an individual doing damage just can't have an effect on the game. And then the hidden problem underneath is that the comps that beat GOATS get beat easily by other things. So yes, we might see some variety that way, but we're still dealing with the rock, paper, nuclear bomb, I think. It's just teams might be incentivized a bit more to pick anti-GOATS comps, but will the pros just default to it anyway? Because, well, honestly, I think Baptiste has some seriously easy counters. And once you force out Immortality Field, which you can do with a lot of characters that can engage and then disengage and survive, he doesn't look very strong in my opinion. So guys, not the happiest of news, unfortunately, although there's a lot of cool toys on the PTR that I look forward to playing with, and GOATS overall might take a hit on ladder. I don't think it takes a hit at pro play, which is where we're trying to extinguish it and what all these buffs and nerfs and hubbub is all about anyway. At the end of the day, when there's a big play style gap where a comp or strat just does things other comps can't do or can't contest with, you either need new heroes to come in to make that play style turn bad all of a sudden, or get punished, or restructure the way fundamental aspects of the game work, like a new game mode where there's multiple objectives at the same time, for example. That would kill GOATS comp just on its own, or some of the other nerfs I suggested earlier. But without those things, we would have to have some overpowered elements that punishes GOATS, and I don't think there is any yet, meaning that GOATS will still survive. And if GOATS survives, Zarya gets charged, and we're in the same problem we've been in this entire first stage of the Overwatch League. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. With any luck, it'll be more fun to play ladder because GOATS should be harder to execute, but I don't think it's leaving the pros, and really, let's face it, we want to see the pros clicking heads, not swinging flails. So we'll have to see where Blizzard takes it. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell icon so that you get notified when our videos go live. Link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been FREEDO for Your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.